to another episode of Planet Hunters Coffee Chat. I'm your host, Cassie Prolongo, and of course, joining me this week, it looks like we've got both Nora and Cole. Good to see you guys.
Hey, nice to see you.
Hi, Cassie.
Hi. So we are continuing on. We had on past episodes finding a triple star system in test data, and now we're going to do a little bit of a bonus round. We've been getting some great questions from people, so we need to have our exoplanet expert here and our star expert here. So thank you guys for sending in your questions, keeping them coming. We love to see them. We love that you're involved with it. So I thought that we could at least start out. We did say that we were going to, so one caveat, we did say that we were going to do Future of Evolution this week. We're going to do it next week, I promise. This week, we're going to answer questions. So let's just get into it, shall we?
Sounds good.
Alrighty.
Excellent. So these questions are, you guys, these questions are great. So first of all, kudos to the questions that have been submitted. So I'm going to read them out loud. Chris Colvin said, when it comes to the angular separation noted in your paper, 0.529, that is absolutely incredible that we can measure such small distances from a large distance. So question one, this is a two-parter. How confident are we in the distance of the 4 to 4.5 kpc?
So we should probably address that first part first. So when we have that really small angular separation of 0.5 arc seconds. So that is, you're right, that is so tiny. So we can't see that just by taking kind of a standard image, even if you're using a really large telescope. The way we get that is we get that with speckle interferometry. So speckle imaging is really cool. Love speckle imaging. It's a way to kind of freeze out the atmosphere. So when we take images, from the ground, what's really hindering our kind of ability to differentiate between things that are really close by is the atmosphere. So the atmosphere is sometimes a little bit more transparent, sometimes a little bit less transparent, and it fluctuates on quite small timescales. And that kind of blurs out our images. It blurs out the light. So by using this thing called speckle, we can get rid of that essentially. So it takes lots and lots of very rapid fire images, very short exposures of just a couple of milliseconds. And it then combines those after it takes them in Fourier space. It's basically magic. And we can freeze out the atmosphere and we can separate these things that are even if they're really close together. So that's the only reason why we could differentiate those. But yeah, maybe you can answer the second part of that question of the how sure are we in the 4 kiloparsecs, and you already shook your head because
so I will say that Gaia is fantastic and it is doing amazing things, and I love the data and I want them to give me more of the data. That being said, for multiple systems in particular, the solutions from the Gaia data have some issues. So what Gaia does is it kind of like looks at where the position of the stars are in space, and then it tracks their position over time, right? So every time Gaia is on one side of the Earth, it takes a picture, then it's on the other side of the Earth and it takes a picture, and that kind of sets up a baseline to give you a parallax, kind of like how when you have your eyes, they're, when you close one and the other things look a little off. So this blinking from taking pictures on two different sides of the Earth, or not the Earth, sorry, probably around the sun, much bigger baseline. When they take these two snapshots, they can blink the distance and get the parallax, or blink the differences and get the parallax or the distance to the object. And then you also have the position on the sky that it tries to model. So most stars are just kind of moving in some random direction in the sky. And when Gaia, right now, since there's so much data, Gaia has taken a first step by fitting a simple model where it only traces the movement of the star in the sky, doesn't account for any other wobbles that might be there. So if you have a close by star, a second close by star that makes it move a little bit, you're going to have a difference to just the case where your star is moving linearly or in an arc along the sky. It'll wobble a bit, and that makes it harder to fit with this simple model.
Hmm.
Now that's with one star. Now, if you put in 2 stars, then all of a sudden you get a more complicated astrometric wobble, as it's called. And then when they build these solutions for the brightness and the distances of these things, they also assume there's only 1 star. So when there's actually 3 or more, even though it is taking producing 90% of the light that we see, that's still a 10% difference. And then so the distance that you get from these things they should be taken with a grain of salt. Future releases of the Gaia data will improve on this with multiple star models to fit these things. And so I would say it's a good first step. I wouldn't take it as the absolute truth.
Right.
And also, there's a lot of caveats that went into us getting the answer that we got for our distance in the paper.
Yeah, I think the 4 kiloparsecs is the distance that we derived from SED modeling.
Yeah.
I think the Gaia distance was
1 kiloparsec.
1 kiloparsec, yeah. And so the 4 kiloparsecs is from SED modeling, which is also uncertain. So maybe you can say a couple of words about SED modeling.
Oh, SED modeling is something it's really interesting, because you just look at the brightness of a star at a given wavelength. So if you remember our analogy from the last time I was speaking to you guys about when you split light into a prism, the wavelengths, the brightness of a star at a given wavelength, the brightness at a color, sometimes we just shorthand say the color of the star, is related to how massive it is, how bright it is, where it is in its lifetime. And then so you have theoretical models for stars where you say this is how hot and massive it is, and this is what the brightness should look like at this wavelength. Then you just stack all those for however many stars we think should be in the system. So in this case, I think we built this one with a 4-star model.
I think we did, yeah. We included the other one.
We included the 0.5 arc second companion. But the other thing that you have to remember, SED modeling is prone to something called reddening. Have you heard of this one?
No. So what is reddening? Is it what it sounds like it is?
Yes. So
Okay.
you remember how we also said, I don't have my props this time.
I know. I feel lost without the props, to be honest with you. I'm just kidding. Love the props.
I'm not allowed to play with fire anymore. So the hot stars, they look bluer.
Yes.
But when you look at blue starlight through a lot of dust, which there's just a bunch of dust and gas in space,
yeah,
it preferentially blocks the blue light as opposed to the red light, because the blue is a shorter wavelength, so it gets absorbed or blocked by any dust that's in the way, whereas the red light makes it all the way through and we see it.
Right.
So something that intrinsically might be blue will look more red when we see it. And because of that, there's this problem where the brightness of a blue object as we see it depends on how far away it is and how much dust there is in between us.
Oh my God, it's just further complicating like so many things.
So
you make a lot of assumptions when you make these models about how much dust there is and how far away it is, and so you can see it becomes a very difficult problem very quickly.
Yeah, and the other really wild thing is that there are every infinitely small fraction of a different line of sight that you can imagine in the night sky has a different amount of reddening to it.
Oh my gosh. The reddening, aka the reckoning, basically.
Yeah, people have done tremendous work in trying to map out all the dust and gas along the way, and
yeah,
it's very difficult. Hats off to them. But
so to summarize all of that, we are not very certain in those values at all.
I think that's a very astronomer and a very science answer. We're just not certain. More data is needed.
Yeah.
I am certain about one thing.
Yes.
I'm certain that it's incorrect as it is.
You know what? God love you guys. It's awesome. All right. So do you want to know okay, so I think that summarized the remainder of question 1 quite well. Do you have to wait for more Gaia data releases, or is there a way to see yada yada? So I think that Hope that answers the rest of your question, Chris. Question 2, spectroscopy. Can you outline how the types of the 3 stars we are seeing were able to be differentiated? Was it using the least squares deconvolution, LSD, not LSD, method mentioned in the paper, or did I misunderstand what the purpose of LSD is? That can be misconstrued, LSD as the acronym, very quickly. All right, so sorry, this is a family show. Okay, so was it using the least squares deconvolution method? And I'll kick that over to you guys.
So the 3 stars, I guess we're talking about the inner binary and the outer star. So no, we did not use the least squared convolution to do that. So we only know, based on the spectra, we only know the spectral type of the outer star, of the most massive one, of the brightest one, because that is completely dominating the light. So that outer star is, when we take a spectrum, that's all we see. We see no signature of either of the 2 inner stars in that spectra. So we can't use that to say anything else about those inner stars. So what we did to get the spectral type is we took that spectrum of the outer star and we compared that to synthetic spectra of what you would expect to see for certain spectral types. And you can look, there are certain diagnostic lines, I want to say helium lines that we looked at. And we looked at the depths of certain lines compared to other lines, and we were able to, from that, say determine the spectral type of that outer star. The reason why we can make some assumptions about the spectral types of the inner 2 stars is because we know the spectral type of the outer star, we know a mass range, and from the modeling of the ETVs and the RVs, we can therefore kind of constrain the masses of the inner stars, and based on the masses of those inner stars that we derived, we can then determine kind of the spectral type. But we did not use the least squared convolution method. But maybe Cole wants to say a couple of words about how that method works. And
how it works is kind of magic. A lot of these spectroscopic techniques can be just reduced to pure magic. But basically what it does is it assumes that all lines, so spectroscopic lines in a star with locations in wavelength space where they absorb light, just because of the temperature of the gas in that region. So you absorb light at that wavelength, and then you assume, roughly speaking, that the structure of all of these lines are the same, just with some difference in the strength of these lines, right? So you make that assumption, and then you have a template of lines. You just know where the wavelengths are, and you pass them across the real spectra. And then you say, yeah, they match very well here. And then because they're all individual, you can actually combine them to a common line profile. So like one common underlying profile. And that's effectively what we tried to do with the LSD, least squares deconvolution.
Right. Excellent. Very cool.
Sometimes, so in other cases, which I guess is where this question originates from, sometimes you can see signatures from multiple stars in the same spectrum. So in that case, you could use the least squared convolution to separate out the 2 spectra, the signatures from the 2 stars. And in that case, you could use that same comparison technique where you compare what you see to what you would expect from synthetic spectra. And in that way, you could, not in this case, but for other cases, you could use that method to determine the spectral types of multiple components. But in our case, in this case, because the light contribution is so small from the inner 2 stars, we would need to use a much larger telescope, get much higher signal to noise, maybe even somehow orient it so that we block out. I don't know. It's just not possible at the moment.
I also don't necessarily know that we'll ever be able to get the light from the less massive 2 star, from that inner binary. Well, because so we talk about light contribution, but then there's also spectroscopic contribution, and this is something that I get yelled at for constantly.
Why?
By my colleagues. I'm like, oh, we can see it. There's like a 10% light contribution, and then they're like, no, but this is like 0.1% spectroscopic contribution. And what that means is that although 10% of the light might be coming from any given object, if that object is rotating very rapidly, the light is smeared out because of the Doppler effect to many different wavelengths. So if you have all the area under one line, it decreases and is spread out. It's shared evenly across all the wavelengths. So 10% can go to 1% or less very easily.
Oh gosh. So it's like it's false then, basically. It's not what you're receiving is correct.
Hope it's there, but it's just in such small quantities that we're never going to be able to pull it out.
Yeah, so the line, it's kind of the area under a line is always the same.
Yeah.
But if the star is really rapidly rotating, which a lot of stars do, then the line goes from being nice, long and narrow, which is easy to see, to just being flattened, kind of smeared out across the spectra. So it becomes very, very difficult to see.
Gotcha.
So yeah, that's I guess that's the spectroscopic contribution. Didn't know that.
Yeah, great question. I mean, good answer, you guys. Really, like, these are like long questions. I'm impressed with this. So we have another one based on the interview that we did last week, actually with Abby, Nora. And this person asks, I don't understand how a smaller combination of masses can have a larger mass orbiting it. In words, diagrams, and gestures, the quote unquote outer, end quote, big star, end quote, at the edge, end quote, is described as orbiting around the inner center binary. If the big star has most of the mass and is closer to the system's barycenter, why isn't it said that the binary is orbiting the big star? Great question.
Yeah, really good question. There's a bit of nuance to this. So in the diagrams, we've simplified it by drawing the orbits as circular, and we've simplified the diagrams by making the single star go around the binary, when of course, just as you said, they orbit around a common center of mass, which would be closer to the more massive star. But in literature, the convention is that the binary is considered the inner star, and that's to do with the formation of what would you expect to form first. So you are completely correct in terms of how we phrase things, and that's just convention of how we say inner and outer. But yeah, you are correct in that they orbit around a common center of mass, which is closer to the more massive star.
Yeah. Things evolve, language evolves too. So it seems like that was just a language choice, basically. And this participant was spot on with their question, basically. Yeah. That's great. Very cool. Okay, so those were some great questions that were submitted, and we thought to give them proper justice that we needed to actually create an episode about that. So that is all that I have for this week. Unless there's any points of clarity, Nora or Cole, that you guys wanted to bring up before we close out this episode.
I blame the theorists that came before us for this nomenclature issue.
Right. It's good to do this. It's like, it wasn't us. It was.
Yeah. We spent so long trying to figure out, the different symbols for different things, and different papers claiming different letters.
Notebooks with but what if did they mean this? And then if they meant that, then this number has to have a plus pi. And
square root of 2's came in there. I don't know.
The important thing is you got there in the end, and it was published, and it was a great contribution to science. So be proud. Be proud. You guys did good. Okay, so that's all we're going to have for this week. Thank you very much for joining us. Join us next week, because we're going to be talking about the future of evolution to really close out this wonderful series that we had, and then on to the next bit. So thank you very much, Nora and Cole. Good to see you, and we'll see you next week. Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.